My name is Raymond Mercer. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years in the cockpit of a commercial airliner, and the very first thing they teach you, before the instruments, before the radios, before any of the rest of it, is the go/no-go decision. Every single flight, before you ever push back from the gate, you make one honest call. Are the conditions safe to fly or aren't they? And here is the part most people never understand about that decision. You do not make it based on how badly the passengers want to get where they're going. You don't make it based on the schedule, or the pressure, or the fact that 180 people have somewhere to be. You make it based on what is actually in front of you: the weather, the aircraft, the numbers, the truth. I made that call thousands of times across 31 years. Some days I flew. Some days I stood at a gate and told a furious terminal full of people that we were not going anywhere tonight. And I slept fine, because the decision was right. What I never expected was to make the most important go/no-go decision of my whole life, standing at my own kitchen counter, 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, reading a list my daughter-in-law had sent to my wife. 16 dishes, 26 guests, a start time of 4:30 in the morning, one cook. I read it twice, and somewhere in the back of my mind, a voice I'd trusted for 3 decades said the same thing it had said on every bad weather night of my career. This one's a no-go. Before I take you back to the beginning, if this is your first time here, do me a small favour. Hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. And down in the comments, tell me your city and what time it is where you are right now. I read every single one of them. It means more than you know to picture exactly where all of you are sitting while you listen to this. Go ahead and do that, and then settle in, because this is a story I've needed to tell for a while. Let me take you back to 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, the morning I realised my daughter-in-law had badly misjudged the people she was dealing with. Ruth and I have been married 36 years. Before I tell you what was done to her, I need you to understand who she is, because the whole thing only makes sense once you know that. Ruth was a labour and delivery nurse for 31 years, most of them at the same hospital on the north side of Pittsburgh. Think about what that job actually is. People come to her on the most frightening, most overwhelming day of their lives, and her entire purpose is to keep them calm while everything inside them is screaming. She held the hands of teenage mothers and terrified fathers and grandmothers who'd done it 5 times before and were still afraid. She delivered babies in elevators when there wasn't time for anything else. She worked Christmas, she worked New Year's, she worked every holiday you can name, because babies don't check the calendar, and she never once complained about it where I could hear. She is the most competent human being I have ever met. I flew jets for a living, and I will tell you flat out, she is steadier under pressure than any captain I ever shared a cockpit with. And she's also, and I say this knowing exactly what it cost her over the years, a woman who spent her entire life making things easier for everyone around her. It was in her hands. She couldn't sit in a room where someone needed something and not get up. It was who she was. It is still who she is. The trouble with a person like that is the world learns it fast, and the world is not always kind about what it does with that information. Our son Nathan is 33. He grew up careful and exact, the kind of boy who lined his shoes up at the door and counted his change twice. He became a certified public accountant, which suits him right down to the ground. He measures everything. He double-checks. He doesn't like loose ends. I am proud of him the particular way a father is proud when his son turns out to be, underneath everything, a genuinely decent man. Nathan met Whitney 4 years ago and married her 2 years after that. It was a small wedding, in a rented barn outside the city, string lights and mason jars. Ruth spent 3 evenings the week before assembling the centerpieces Whitney had picked off the internet because the florist's quote had come in too high, and Whitney had mentioned lightly that it was a shame nobody in the family was crafty. I offered to drive them over and set them up. Ruth said she had it handled. That was Ruth. I liked Whitney well enough at the start, and I want to be fair about that. She was sharp, organised. She had opinions about everything, and she shared them freely, and none of that is a flaw on its own. The trouble, and it took me longer than it should have to put a name to it, was that an awful lot of Whitney's opinions turned out to be opinions about what Ruth ought to be doing. And the way she delivered them left no room for the answer to be anything but yes. There was never a question mark, not really. There was a request already dressed and standing at the door with its coat on, waiting to be let out. I noticed it early. I mentioned it to Ruth once, quietly, in the car. She told me I was being protective. She was right. I was. But being protective and being correct are not mutually exclusive, and I knew that even then. The pattern started small. It always does. That's what makes it so easy to talk yourself out of seeing it. About a year into the marriage, there was Whitney's birthday dinner. It came as a text to Ruth on a Wednesday. "Hey Mom, Nathan and I are doing a little birthday thing Saturday. Just family, maybe 10 people. Your chicken and dumplings would be so perfect for it." Read that again. There's no question anywhere in it. There's no, "would you be willing?" No, only if you have the time. No, I know it's short notice. There's just the assumption. Already decided. Already in motion. Ruth made the chicken and dumplings. She also made a pan of cornbread and a green bean dish and a coconut cake from scratch. Because months earlier she'd heard Whitney mention in passing that coconut cake reminded her of her late grandmother. That's the part people like Whitney never account for. Ruth doesn't just do the task. She listens for the things you didn't even ask for, and she does those too, quietly, without making a show of it. Nobody thanked her after that dinner. Whitney posted a whole carousel of photos to her Instagram that night. The cake was in 3 of them. There was a caption about how blessed she was. Ruth's name wasn't in it. A few months later, Nathan and Whitney took a trip to Mexico for 9 days. Nathan texted me on a Thursday. "Hey Dad, okay if Cooper stays with you guys while we're gone? We leave Sunday." Cooper is their dog, a big goofy retriever, and we love him, so of course I said yes. But I also noticed it was Thursday, they were leaving Sunday, and this was the first we'd heard of any of it. I brought it up with Ruth that night. She shrugged and said it was fine, she liked having Cooper around. I said it isn't about whether it's fine, it's about the way she asks, like we're a kennel that doesn't charge. And Ruth gave me that look she had, patient and a little tired, the look that meant, "I know, Raymond, but let's not turn it into a thing." I let it go. I want to be honest with you, because this story doesn't work if I'm only honest about her. I should not have let it go. Looking back now, that was the exact moment to say something. To Nathan, to Whitney, to somebody. And instead I folded the same folding I'd been quietly criticising my wife for. That one's on me, and I'll own it. A pilot who can't admit his own bad calls is a pilot who's going to make worse ones. Now, 3 weeks before Thanksgiving. A Tuesday evening. I was in the front room with a ball game on low when Ruth came in from the kitchen with her phone in her hand. She didn't say anything. She just held it out to me. I took it and I read it. 2 turkeys combined £24. Cornbread stuffing from scratch. Sausage stuffing from scratch. Garlic mashed potatoes. Sweet potato casserole. Marshmallow top. Green bean casserole. Honey glazed carrots. Roasted Brussels sprouts. Creamed corn. Fresh cranberry relish. Not canned. Homemade dinner rolls. Turkey gravy. Pumpkin pie. Pecan pie. Apple galette. Charcuterie board for arrivals. 16 items. I counted them. Below the list, 26 guests confirmed. And below that, plan to start around 4:30 to be safe. Kitchen's all yours. I set the phone down on the side table. Then I picked it back up and read the last line one more time. Because I wanted to be sure I'd read it right. Kitchen's all yours. Not our kitchen. Not would you be okay with. Not I know this is a huge ask, just the kitchen is yours. Like a dispatch release. Like a work order routed to a vendor, confirming the vendor would handle it. In 31 years, I had read a lot of flight plans handed to me as though my agreement were a formality, and I knew this feeling exactly. I looked up at my wife. She was standing in the doorway with her arms crossed. She wasn't angry yet. She was doing the thing she did when she was holding very still, deciding whether a situation was as bad as it looked. It was as bad as it looked. "I'll call Nathan," I said. "No." Quiet but clear. "Let me handle it first." She took the phone back and typed something, and I watched her face while she did it. "That's an awful lot for one person, honey. Maybe we could split some of it up." Whitney's reply landed in under 2 minutes. "Oh, Mom, you've done it before and it always turns out amazing. You're honestly so much better at this than the rest of us. We'll be running around getting everything else perfect." Ruth read it, and she set the phone face down on the arm of the couch, and she went back into the kitchen without a word. And I sat there in the blue light of a ball game I was no longer watching. And I started, very quietly, to do the kind of thinking I used to do at 38,000 feet, when an engine instrument went somewhere it shouldn't. I wasn't angry. Not yet. Anger is fuel, and you don't burn fuel before you know you're heading. But the no-go light had come on, and once it comes on, you don't unsee it. 2 Sundays before Thanksgiving, Nathan had the family over for a casual dinner. Pizza, a bagged salad, nothing Whitney had cooked. Because Whitney didn't cook, and I'll give her this much credit. She never pretended she did. The pretending was reserved for other areas. After we ate, while Tessa, Whitney's younger sister, was in the middle of some story, Ruth found a pause and turned to Whitney. "I've been thinking about Thanksgiving," she said. Gentle, reasonable. "What if Tessa took a couple of the sides? Or we could order the pies from that bakery on Liberty. They do a beautiful pecan." Whitney laughed. It was a very particular laugh. Warm on the top, completely decided underneath. "Mum." She reached across and patted Ruth's hand. "That's literally your thing. Don't overthink it. It always comes out so beautiful when you do it." Tessa nodded along. Dylan, Tessa's boyfriend, looked at his phone. And Nathan, my son, the careful one, the decent one, looked down at his slice of pizza and said absolutely nothing. I watched my son look at a slice of pizza while his mother quietly asked for help and got patted on the hand instead. And I'll tell you what went through me, because it wasn't anger first, it was something closer to grief. I taught that boy that silence in the face of something wrong is its own kind of answer. I taught him that. I'd watched him learn it. And somewhere between his 20s and that couch, he'd set the lesson down and walked off without it. I kept my face flat. 31 years of telling a cabin full of frightened people that everything was fine in a calm, even voice while my own heart rate was up. That training does not leave you. You learn to keep the storm off your face until you've decided what to do about it. On the drive home, I said it plainly. "That's not happening, Ruth. You're not doing that alone." She was looking out the window at the wet road going by. 26 people, she said. 4:30 in the morning, by myself. A long pause. "No, I know." And then, still looking out the window, she said something that made me turn my head. "I already have a plan." That night, Ruth called Marjorie Vance. Marjorie had been Ruth's closest friend for more than 20 years. They'd met on the same hospital unit, back when they were both young and overwhelmed, and they'd held each other up through every hard shift and every hard year since. Marjorie had retired 3 years earlier and moved down to Savannah, Georgia, to a little white house near the marsh. Ruth talked to her every Sunday evening, the two of them on video, picking up wherever they'd left off. I sat at the kitchen table while Ruth was on the phone in the bedroom. When she came out 20 minutes later, something in her face had changed. It had settled. You know that look on a person who's made a decision, and the decision has already taken root in them, and there's no arguing it out anymore. She sat down across from me, put both hands flat on the table. "Marjorie invited us for Thanksgiving," she said. "Her back porch. Her mother's roast chicken with sage and brown butter. Just the 3 of us, her and you and me." I said, "I'm in." She blinked. "Just like that?" "Ruth," I folded my hands. "Our daughter-in-law sent you a work order. Our son sat on a couch and watched her do it and ate his pizza. And your best friend of 20 years is offering you a back porch in Georgia and a home-cooked meal you don't have to lift a finger for." I paused. "I'm having a hard time finding the part of this that's a difficult decision." She let out a breath. A long, slow one. The kind you let out when you've been holding something in for longer than you realised. Then she pulled the notepad across the table and wrote something on it. Just a few lines, folded it once, and set it beside her coffee cup. I didn't ask what it was yet. And then she opened the laptop and turned it toward me, and I watched the airline's website load. I watched her find a 6:20 in the morning departure out of Pittsburgh on Thanksgiving Day, headed for Savannah. 2 seats. She looked up at me. I gave her one nod, the same nod I'd given 1,000 first officers, when the numbers came out right and it was time to go. She pressed confirm. And I'll tell you, I felt something lift off my chest that had been sitting there for a year and a half. The texts kept coming all that week, like she didn't even need a reply to keep going. Monday. Reminder the rolls have to be from scratch. Store-bought always tastes like cardboard lol. Wednesday, hey mum, scratch crust on the pies too. The frozen kind gets soggy and you can always tell. I'll send you a tutorial if it helps. Friday. One more thing. Fresh cranberry, please. not the can. The Hales are kind of foodies, and I want everything elevated. The Hales. That was the first time those names had appeared, and they snagged on me. I asked Ruth who the Hales were. She told me Bradford Hale was the senior partner at Nathan's accounting firm, and that Nathan was up for a promotion that would put him on the partner track, and the decision was coming after the new year. And I sat with that, and the whole thing rotated about a quarter turn and showed me its other side. This Thanksgiving, the one with the 16-item list and the 4:30 start, and the strict instructions about cranberry sauce, was not a family dinner. It had never been a family dinner. It was a business event. Whitney wanted to impress her husband's boss, to put her best self on display at a beautifully staged table, and she had decided, without ever quite saying it, that the instrument she'd use to do that was my wife's 2 hands. Every text came with no please and total certainty. And Ruth answered every single one of them with one word. Okay. I asked her once if that was wise, if she was leading the girl on. I'm not leading her on, Ruth said. I'm just not going to argue with someone who isn't listening. You don't waste your breath in a room where the other person already left. I had been married to this woman for 36 years, and I knew that particular flavour of calm. It was the same calm she used on a panicking father in a delivery room. Steady, kind, completely done negotiating. The boarding passes printed out 2 at a time. I set them in the little dish on my nightstand, next to my wallet and my reading glasses. Seats 12, A and 12B, 6:20 in the morning. 10 days before Thanksgiving, in every way that actually mattered, we were already gone. The only thing left to settle was the timing of when everyone else would find out. 8 days out, Ruth drove over to Nathan and Whitney's to drop off a casserole dish she'd borrowed. She came home half an hour later and sat down at the kitchen table without taking her coat off. I know that look. What happened? I said. She told me. The front door had been unlocked. She'd stepped inside to set the dish on the counter, and she'd heard Whitney upstairs on the phone, voice carrying down the stairwell. The Hales are definitely coming. Bradford and Lillian, and the Coopermans from Nathan's office. I just need to look amazing and have the place perfect. Mum's handling all the food, so honestly that whole part's covered. Mum's handling all the food. That whole part's covered. I leaned back in my chair and I'll tell you what I thought of. Up at altitude, sometimes you fly into what looks like solid weather. A wall of cloud dead ahead that looks like it'll throw you around for an hour. And then you punch into it and there's nothing there, it's vapour. It looks like a structure, and it's holding nothing up. That's what this was. Whitney had built something that looked like a family Thanksgiving, and it was vapour. It was a staged impression for her husband's boss, and the one piece of it she'd treated as solid, as load-bearing, the thing she'd planned the entire production around without ever once asking, was my wife. Ruth finally took her coat off and hung it on the back of the chair. She doesn't think we'll really do it, she said. She thinks I'll show up at 4:30 in the morning, like I always have, because I always have. I got up and put the kettle on. Then Thanksgiving, I said, is going to be very educational for her. Ruth almost smiled. 6 days before Thanksgiving, I called Nathan myself. Ruth had asked me not to. She'd already spoken to him, plainly, more than once, and it hadn't moved anything. But I am his father, and there are some things a man needs to hear in his father's voice, even when, especially when, he doesn't want to. He picked up on the second ring. Hey, Dad. I kept it short, the way you keep a radio call short when it matters. Nathan, your mother's been handed a list of 16 dishes for 26 people. No help starting at 4:30 in the morning. She told you it was too much. You told her to do it anyway. I need you to fix that. A pause. Dad, I know how it looks, but Whit's already got the whole thing planned around. Nathan. Another pause. It's just this one time, he said. And there it was. I'd flown with enough co-pilots to know the sound of a man reading words off a card somebody else handed him. Those weren't Nathan's words. They were Whitney's words, loaded and waiting in his mouth. I'm going to say this once clearly, I told him. Your mother is not going to be the catering staff for your wife's networking dinner. I don't care whose boss is coming. You figure it out. Dad, I really think you're making this bigger than... I love you, I said. Good night. And I hung up. Ruth was at the kitchen table when I came back in. She read my face. Well, she said, He's not ready to hear it yet, I told her. He will be, but not yet. She nodded slowly. Then she stood, went down the hall, reached up to the top shelf of the closet, and came back carrying her suitcase. She set it open on the bed, and she started to pack. Before I tell you what happened the night before we left, let me ask you something, and I want you to really sit with it for a second. Have you ever told someone you love a hard, plain truth, and then watched them decide, right in front of you, not to hear it? If you know that exact feeling, drop a single word in the comments. Heard. I want to see how many of you it is, and if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. Because what happens next is the part that nobody at that dinner table saw coming. I want to tell you about an apron. It's an old olive green one, canvas with a scorch mark on the bottom hem, where I backed it into a burner one Sunday years ago and never quite cared enough to replace it. It hangs on a hook on the inside of our pantry door. I've worn it every Sunday morning, for I don't know how long, because Sunday mornings are when I make the waffles. That's my one thing in that kitchen. I am not a cook. Ruth ran every Thanksgiving we ever hosted, and I'll tell you exactly what I was. Support staff. I couldn't dice an onion to any standard she'd recognise, but I could stand at that counter next to her for 6 hours, and hand her things before she asked, and keep her coffee hot, and make her laugh when the gravy wasn't cooperating, and make absolutely sure that she was never once alone in there. For 30-some years, that was my post, and I held it gladly, because I knew exactly what it was worth, and that's the thing Whitney never understood. Not for 1 second. She thought the problem with her list was the labour. It wasn't only the labour, it was the company. She'd planned a kitchen with one person in it, working in the dark from 4:30 in the morning, alone, for 26 people who'd never know what it cost. She hadn't just ordered up the food, she'd ordered up my wife's solitude and called it a favour. The night before Thanksgiving, while Ruth was finishing the packing, I went into the kitchen for no real reason, something to do with my hands. I took the apron down off the hook and held it, and I thought about all the Thanksgivings I'd stood at that stove behind that woman, 30 plus of them. The timers going, the windows fogged, one of us saying something that landed just right and both of us laughing in a steam-warm kitchen that smelled like the whole year had been building to it. I folded the apron along its old creases and hung it back on the hook. It didn't need to come to Georgia, it belonged right there, but it wasn't going to be used this Thanksgiving, and I made my peace with that, and I turned off the light. When I came back to the bedroom, Ruth had set my suitcase open on the bed, already half packed with my things. She knew me well enough to start without asking. After 36 years, half the love is somebody packing your socks before you think to. Later that night, after we'd both finished, I found her sitting at the kitchen table. The notepad was in front of her, the few lines she'd written days ago, folded once, sitting there the whole time, like a decision that had already been made and was just waiting for the rest of us to catch up. She unfolded it now and smoothed it flat with her palm, and I read it over her shoulder. Nathan, I love you. That hasn't changed and it never will. But I am not able to cook Thanksgiving for 26 people by myself. I said that. I said it more than once. Nobody listened. So your dad and I are going to see Marjorie. We'll be home Sunday, the kitchen is yours. Mum and Dad. She'd added and Dad at the bottom in a different pen. I hadn't asked her to. I looked at those 2 words for a second longer than I meant to. She carried the note out to the kitchen island, where the big roasting pan sat empty, scrubbed and ready, the way it would have been any other Thanksgiving Eve. She set the note down inside the empty pan. Then she took her coffee mug from the rack and set it on top of the note to hold it down. The empty pan. I don't think she planned that part, but I've thought about it 100 times since. The most honest thing in that whole house was an empty roasting pan with a note in the bottom of it. We stood there a minute, the two of us, the kitchen light on, the house dead quiet. We're going to hear about this, I said. Yes, she said. Nathan's going to be hurt. Yes, I looked at her. 36 years, and she could still answer a whole paragraph with one look. You ready? Raymond, she said. I've been ready for 2 weeks. I turned off the kitchen light. She carried her suitcase to the door. I carried mine. And at 4 a.m, we stood side by side in the front hall and waited for the car. The driver who picked us up didn't ask why 2 people in their 60s were leaving with suitcases at 4 a.m. on Thanksgiving, which suited us fine. He had a low station on the radio and the heat turned up, and Ruth sat beside me in the back, with her hands folded in her lap, and the particular stillness of a person who's made her decision and is now just letting it carry her. The Pittsburgh airport at 4:30 in the morning has a specific quality to it. Not empty, exactly. Suspended. Like the whole building's holding its breath between one day and the next. I knew that hour well from the other side of the glass, walking through those concourses, in a uniform with a flight bag, and it felt strange and good to be walking it now as just a passenger. Just a husband, taking his wife somewhere better. I bought us 2 coffees from a machine that did a genuinely poor job of it, and we drank them anyway. Ruth's phone had 3 unread messages from Whitney, sent the night before. A reminder, a note about the rolls, a turkey emoji. Neither of us opened them. At 5:40 they called our group. We got in line, and as we stood there, I did the arithmetic I'd done my whole working life. The kind where you picture exactly where everyone is and what's about to happen. Right now, I thought, 26 people believe there is a Thanksgiving dinner being prepared in a warm kitchen back in this city. And in a few hours, somebody is going to walk downstairs into a cold, dark kitchen and find a note in the bottom of an empty pan. My phone buzzed as we stepped onto the jet bridge. Nathan. Hey, Dad. Gonna swing by and grab you and Mum around 7. Whit wants her there by 8 to get started. See you soon. He didn't know yet. I put the phone in my jacket and didn't answer. We found 12A and 12B. Ruth took the window. When the wheels left the ground at 6:22, and 2 minutes late, which felt about right for the day, she reached over and put her hand on mine. And we didn't say anything, because we didn't need to. That was the point of no return. On every flight, there's a moment past which you cannot turn back and land where you started, and you commit to the destination. We'd passed ours. And I will tell you, watching Pittsburgh tilt away under the wing in the grey morning dark, I've rarely felt so completely sure of a heading in my life. Marjorie Vance was waiting at the Savannah arrivals curb with 2 paper cups of real coffee and absolutely no dramatic reaction whatsoever, which is precisely what you want from a friend of 20 years. She hugged Ruth first, a long one. Then she looked at me. Raymond, you actually came. Did you think I wouldn't? I thought Ruth might talk you out of it on the way to the airport. Out of guilt. She tried, I said. Ruth shot me a look. She tried for about 30 seconds, I added. We drove out to her place with the windows cracked. The air was warm in a way that November in Pennsylvania makes you forget is even possible. Salt and pine and something green and flowering I couldn't have named. After more than 3 decades of grey Pittsburgh autumns, it felt like a different planet that had simply decided to be kinder about the weather. Marjorie's house was small and white, with a live oak in the side yard dripping Spanish moss, and an enormous grey cat named Gus who acknowledged our arrival from the back of the couch with one slow blink and then went back to ignoring us entirely. We took our coffees out to the back porch. It looked over the marsh, flat gold grass running out to a thread of water, the whole thing catching the morning light in long, low pieces. A heron stood out there in the shallows, perfectly still, doing absolutely nothing with complete and total authority. Ruth's phone lit up on the table between us. Nathan. Then Whitney. Then a number I didn't recognise that turned out to be Tessa. I turned it face down. Marjorie looked at me over her cup. You know it isn't going to stop today. It'll stop when it stops, I said. She refilled my coffee. I sat back and looked out at that heron standing in the marsh, going precisely nowhere on purpose, and I thought, somewhere up in Pennsylvania right now, there is a kitchen with a note in an empty pan and no turkey in it. And down here there is a porch and a heron, and my wife with her shoes off, and her face turned up to the sun for the first time in a year and a half. Some problems, it turns out, solve themselves. You just have to be brave enough to stop being the solution. Nathan told us the rest of it later, in pieces over a few days. I'll lay it out the way I came to understand it. At about 3 minutes to 8 that morning, Whitney came downstairs in a brand new apron, a striped linen one she'd bought specifically for the morning prep photo she'd been planning. She had a whole vision. The golden kitchen light, fresh flowers on the counter, a steaming mug, the beautiful beginning of something spectacular, captioned with something about gratitude. The kitchen was dark and cold. No Ruth. No Raymond. No turkeys thawing in the sink. No prep. No smell of anything. No warmth in the room at all. Just the island, and the big roasting pan sitting on it, scrubbed and empty, and a coffee mug holding down a folded piece of paper. She picked it up. She read it. And then, Nathan said. She just stood there, holding it, not moving. Nathan came down about 2 minutes later and found her like that, frozen in her new apron. He took the note out of her hand and read it himself, and he told me later he stood there a full 30 seconds without saying a word. Then he called me. I didn't answer. He called Ruth. No answer. He called my cell again and texted. And then, this is the part that got me. He tried the house landline on the off chance we'd left our phones behind and were sitting in the dark at home for some reason. Then he called Tessa. Tessa got there at 8:15, still in her coat. "Whitney," she said, looking around the dead kitchen, "can you cook a turkey?" "Tessa," Whitney said, "I have never cooked a turkey in my life." Dylan offered to pull up a recipe on his phone. Nobody took him up on it, and meanwhile 26 people had confirmed. The centerpiece flowers had been delivered the afternoon before. Bradford and Lillian Hale had RSVP'd within 20 minutes of getting the invitation. The clock on the kitchen wall read 8:32, 6.5 hours to dinner. By 9 o'clock, Whitney had called 4 restaurants. The first had stopped taking Thanksgiving orders back in October. The second had a packaged holiday dinner but required 72 hours' notice. And it was, at that point, roughly 6 hours. The third didn't pick up. The fourth, a place she'd bookmarked out of a magazine eye, was fully booked for dining in and offered nothing to go on the holiday. She hung up on the fourth one without saying goodbye. Nathan drove to the grocery store at 9:30. The Thanksgiving section, a full aisle 2 weeks earlier, was down to 4 frozen turkeys, and the biggest one was 18 pounds and needed 3 to 4 days in the refrigerator to thaw safely. He stood in the freezer aisle with an empty cart and no good options. My careful, exact son, the man who measures everything twice, standing in front of a freezer case, doing math that didn't work no matter how he ran it. He came home with what he could find: 5 rotisserie chickens from the deli counter, 2 boxes of instant mashed potato flakes, a bag of frozen dinner rolls, a pecan pie in a plastic clamshell, and a pumpkin pie from the bakery case, with a small dent in the box, a wedge of brie, and a sleeve of crackers because he'd remembered, at the last second, the charcuterie board. Tessa tried to make the green bean casserole off a recipe on her phone. She got a phone call partway through and forgot the timer, and the kitchen smelled like scorched onions for the rest of the afternoon. By 1:30, the guests started arriving. The Hales came in at 1:45, exactly on time. The punctuality of people attending a work-adjacent event who have already calculated, to the minute, how long they intend to stay. Bradford wore a blazer. Lillian brought a bottle of wine and handed it to Whitney at the door with a smile that gave away absolutely nothing. I will say this for Whitney. The table looked beautiful. She has a genuine eye for it, and I won't pretend otherwise. The linen runner, the white and amber arrangement down the centre, a taper candle at every place. She had put real care into how it looked. And then the food came out. 5 rotisserie chickens, arranged on her good china platters. Instant mashed potatoes with a slightly grey cast to them in the candlelight. Frozen rolls, still a little cool in the middle. The pecan pie up on a cake stand. The plastic clamshell nowhere in sight, but its faint outline still pressed into the crust if you looked. Lillian Hale looked the spread over, set her wineglass down very carefully, and said nothing at all. Whitney smiled at the table and said brightly, "We had a little last-minute change of plans. My in-laws weren't feeling well." Bradford nodded and said, "Oh, that's a shame," and reached for a chicken. And in the kitchen, with his back to the room, Nathan stood at the counter and finally understood. Not in his head, he'd understood it in his head for weeks. In his body, the way a truth lands when it finally stops bouncing off the surface and goes all the way in. He had asked his mother to do one thing. She had told him plainly it was too much. He had said, "Can you just do this one time?" And standing there looking at 5 grocery store chickens on his wife's wedding china, he understood, at last, exactly what that one thing had been. Marjorie's mother's roast chicken was everything she'd promised it would be. Crackling skin, deeply golden, the sage and brown butter filling the whole porch. We ate it with real mashed potatoes, lumpy in the good way, plenty of butter, a salad out of Marjorie's own little garden, a bottle of white wine that turned out a great deal better than its price suggested it had any right to. We ate outside on the porch as the afternoon light came down over the marsh. It had shifted from the sharp gold of the morning to something lower and warmer, the sun easing toward the tree line across the water. Gus had relocated from the couch to the porch doorway and was occupying the threshold with the serene confidence of a cat who considers all property lines to be merely suggestions. I was halfway through telling Marjorie about a flight I'd diverted years ago. A line of thunderstorms over the Smokies, the kind of weather where the only smart move is to land somewhere you didn't plan to, and wait it out. When Ruth's phone rang on the table between us, Whitney. Ruth looked at the phone, then at me, then at Marjorie. Marjorie looked very intently at her chicken. Ruth picked up. "Hi, Whitney." I could hear Whitney's voice, pitched higher than usual, tight at the edges. "Where are you? Do you have any idea what's happening here right now? Bradford is here. Nathan's boss is sitting at our table, and there is nothing ready. Nothing. And you could have at least called." Ruth set her fork down. She looked out at the marsh, and she answered in the exact voice I'd heard her use 100 times on a frightened, furious person in a hospital corridor. Quiet. Unhurried. Completely finished negotiating. "Whitney," she said, "I told you I couldn't do it alone. I told you 3 weeks ago. I told you again at Sunday dinner. Raymond called Nathan and told him directly. Nobody listened to any of us." A pause. "So we made a different plan. For ourselves, for once." A silence on the line. Then smaller. "That's so selfish." "We'll be home Sunday," Ruth said. "I hope the rest of your evening goes well." And she hung up. Marjorie refilled her wineglass without a word. 20 seconds later, my phone rang. "Nathan." I answered. He didn't speak right away. I could hear the muffled noise of the party behind a door, and then just the wind in a backyard as he stepped outside. "Dad." His voice had changed. The defensive edge was gone. What was underneath it was quieter and younger, the sound of a man who stopped performing and started actually feeling something. "I don't know what to say," he said. I knew it was too much. I kept telling myself it would all be fine, that you'd both just show up, like always. And I didn't say anything when I should have. He stopped. "I'm sorry, Dad. Tell Mom I'm sorry." And I believed him. Nathan has never been a dishonest man. He took the easy path, kept his head down to avoid a fight, let things slide because confrontation felt expensive. But that's a failure of nerve, not a failure of character, and there's a real difference between the two. I'd made the same failure myself, earlier in this very story. With a dog and a Thursday text I should have answered differently. He came by it honestly. He got it from somewhere. "I know, son," I said. "We'll talk Sunday when we're home. Go take care of your guests." "Is the food good down there?" he asked, and there was something almost like a laugh in it, broken in the middle. I looked at the plate in front of me. The crackling chicken, the buttered potatoes, the warm porch, the low gold light. My wife across the table with her shoulders finally down from around her ears for the first time in a year and a half. "It's wonderful," I said. Marjorie made her mother's chicken. A pause. "Good," he said. I heard him steady himself. "Good, Dad, go enjoy it." "Sunday," I said. I set the phone down. Ruth looked at me across the table. "Roast chicken," she said. "Yes, please," I said, and picked up my fork. Nathan filled in the rest over the following days. Bradford Hale stayed 2 hours. He was, Nathan said, the kind of man who's polite in exact proportion to how well a situation is going. Not cold when things go wrong, just measured, giving a little less of himself. He ate one of the rotisserie chickens without complaint. He complimented the centerpiece, which honestly deserved it. At one point, Lillian leaned over and said to Nathan quietly, "Your parents usually do the cooking, don't they? Are they all right?" Nathan said they'd had a prior commitment they couldn't move, which was true. From the other end of the table, Whitney said there'd been a last-minute change of plans, which was also true, depending how you define last minute. The two explanations didn't quite line up, off by about 40 degrees, the way two improvised stories never quite match when two people are patching the same hole from opposite sides without having compared notes first. Tessa had given up on the green bean casserole and was down at the end of the table next to Dylan. At one point she looked across at her sister and said, quietly but clearly enough for the table to hear, "Wit, you should have just asked them, properly." "Tessa, don't start." Tessa didn't start. But she held the look for a moment. level, steady, the expression of a younger sister who has finally, fully run out of the benefit of the doubt. And then she went back to her plate. The guests were gone by 5, earlier than a holiday dinner usually ends. Earlier than it ends in a house that's been warm and full of cooking smells since the early morning, with that particular heaviness that builds in a home where someone has been quietly working all day so that everyone else can be comfortable. After everyone left, Nathan did the dishes. He told me it was the first time he'd ever washed up after a big family meal, and that surprised me for about half a second, and then it didn't surprise me at all. Ruth had always done it. I'd help sometimes, but Ruth had always done it. Whitney came into the kitchen while he was at the sink and told him he should have called us more. He turned off the water. "I did call them," he said. "They told me it was too much." A pause. "You knew?" she said. "Yeah," Nathan said. "I knew." And he turned the water back on. Whitney left the kitchen. She didn't post a single photo that night. Not the centerpiece, not the beautiful empty table from before the food came out. She'd taken plenty earlier in the day. They stayed in her camera roll. Bradford Hale's next email to Nathan, that Monday, was a routine note about a project deadline. He never mentioned Thanksgiving at all, and that was that. We flew home Sunday afternoon. Pittsburgh came up under the wing, grey and drizzling. That specific low November ceiling the city does so well, not dramatic enough to be interesting, just enough to make a man grateful he'd spent 4 days somewhere with herons and Spanish moss. The car pulled into our driveway, and Nathan was sitting on our front steps. Not his house, ours. He'd driven 40 minutes and parked and sat down on our steps without calling ahead. And that told me something all by itself. It told me he'd thought about it long enough to decide that a phone call wasn't going to be enough. He stood when I came up the walk. We looked at each other for a second. He looked tired in the particular way people look when they've been honest with themselves about something for the first time, and it cost them their sleep. "Whitney didn't come," he said. "Okay," I said. We went inside. Ruth had gotten in a few minutes ahead of me, and the kettle was already on, because of course it was. The 3 of us sat down at the kitchen table. The same table where the note had been 4 days earlier. The same chairs we'd sat in for 30 years. "I knew it was too much," Nathan said. And I said nothing. I kept telling myself it wasn't worth a fight. I let Whit treat you both like you'd just always be there. And I told myself that was fine. He stopped. "It wasn't fine." "No," I said. "It wasn't." He looked at me. I think he'd expected me to build him some scaffolding around the truth, to soften it. I didn't have any to give him. A clean truth holds better without it. Ruth reached across and put her hand over his on the table. "We love you," she said. "That's not in question, and it never was. But we are not going to be made invisible for somebody else's convenience, not even yours." "I hear you," Nathan said. "Good," Ruth said, and she poured the tea. And then we just sat there for a while, the 3 of us, and didn't rush to fill the quiet. It was the kind of quiet that only comes on the far side of something true, being said and actually landing. The quiet after everyone's stopped performing. I'll tell you honestly, it was the best half hour the 3 of us had spent together in 2 years. Whitney called on Monday. I answered. "I want you to know," she said, "that what you did was really hurtful." "Whitney," I said, "I understand it felt that way. And I'd like you to understand that when you send someone a 16-item list and a 4:30 start time and call it a family invitation, that's hurtful too. We can talk about all of it honestly, or we can leave it here. That's up to you." A silence. Then she hung up. She called back 2 days later. This time she talked less and she listened more. She asked how the trip was. She said Savannah sounded nice. She said she'd been thinking. She didn't apologise, not in those exact words. But she asked questions for the first time in 2 years, instead of only handing out instructions, and I recognised that for what it was, the closest thing to an open door we were likely to get, at least for now. You don't refuse an open door because it isn't a parade. Ruth took the second call. They talked for 14 minutes. Longer, Ruth told me afterward, than they had ever once talked without Whitney handing her a task to do somewhere in the middle of it. There was no grand resolution, no moment where everybody wept and understood each other perfectly and swore to become different people. That isn't how it works, and anybody who tells you otherwise is selling something. What changed was simpler than that, and more durable. An assumption got removed. The assumption that our time, our hands, and our willingness were simply available on demand forever. No asking required. That assumption was gone. And once it was gone, things had to be negotiated, which meant they had to be talked about, which meant everybody at the table had to start behaving like people who actually have a choice. That, it turns out, was enough. The months after were quiet in a good way. Nathan started calling more and asking, instead of just informing us of decisions already made. Small things mostly, but they added up the way small things do. He didn't get the partner promotion right away, as it happened. He got it the following year, and he told me on the phone that he'd been a little relieved it hadn't ridden on one Thanksgiving dinner, and I told him that was the smartest thing I'd heard him say in a while. Ruth signed up for a watercolour class at the community centre, Thursday mornings, 10 to noon. She'd been wanting to for over a year and kept putting it off, because there was always something somebody else needed first. There wasn't anymore. We booked Savannah again for March. Marjorie was already mapping out which gardens we'd see and which oyster place we'd go to, and Gus, I'm told, was indifferent to all of it. And one Sunday morning a few weeks after we got back, I put on my old olive apron, the one with the scorch mark on the hem, and I made buttermilk waffles just for the two of us. Ruth poured the coffee and sat at the counter, and we didn't talk about Whitney or Nathan or Thanksgiving or any of it. We just had breakfast. I stood at that counter in that beat-up apron, and I thought, this is what it was always supposed to be. The two of us in this kitchen on a Sunday morning, with nowhere on God's earth we have to be. Right here. About a week after Georgia, Ruth was cleaning out the hall closet and pulled down a shoebox from the top shelf. My handwriting on the lid. Photos. Misc. We brought it to the kitchen table and opened it together. The usual archaeology of a long, shared life. Birthday parties from the 90s with bad film flash. Nathan at 9, holding up a trout off a dock with the solemn pride of a man who has accomplished something permanent. A church picnic neither of us could place. Near the bottom, Ruth held up one photograph and went quiet. It was a Thanksgiving. 8 or 9 years back, I'd guess, by the way the kitchen looked before we repainted it. She was at the stove. I was standing behind her, my arms looped loose around her shoulders, my chin tipped down towards her hair, and we were both laughing at something. I don't remember what. The timer was probably going. The turkey was in the oven. One of us had said something that landed just right. I don't remember the picture being taken, but I remember exactly how it felt to be there, not watching from across the room, not stepping in for the parts that needed me and slipping back out for the rest. Just in it. All of it. Because that was where I wanted to be. Because she shouldn't have to be alone in that kitchen. Because she never once asked me to be there. Which is the whole reason it mattered. And that was the thing Whitney never understood. And the thing my son had set down somewhere along the way and had to pick back up the hard way. You don't send someone you love a work order. You don't route them a list and call it an invitation. You show up. You stand next to them. You hand them things before they ask. You stay in the warm room. Ruth put the photograph in a small frame and set it on the kitchen shelf, right by the window, over the sink. "We should have gone to Florida years ago," she said. Then she caught herself. "Georgia. Years ago. We were exactly where we were supposed to be," I said. "Right up until we weren't." She looked at me. "That's awfully philosophical for a Tuesday." "I'm a deep man, Ruth." She laughed, and I thought, that sound, in this kitchen, on an ordinary Tuesday, with nowhere we had to be, that's what the 36 years were for. Not to produce a Thanksgiving dinner for somebody's networking event. To produce this. So that's the whole of it. A pilot spends his whole career learning one thing above all the others, that the most important decision you ever make is the one you make on the ground, before you go. The go/no-go. And the hardest part of that decision is never reading the weather. The hardest part is being willing to disappoint a whole terminal full of people who are absolutely certain that you should fly anyway. For 36 years, my wife flew every single flight anybody handed her, in every condition, because she couldn't stand to let someone down. And the one time she finally looked at the weather and called it honestly, "This one's a no-go," the world tried to tell her she was being selfish. She wasn't. She was being a pilot. She was for once reading the conditions that were actually in front of her, instead of the ones everyone wished were there. So here's my question for you, and I'd love to hear your answer down in the comments. Have you ever set a boundary that felt like a terrible risk in the moment, and then felt completely, instantly right the second it was done? Tell me about it. I read all of them, and if you're sitting there right now with something heavy in your hands, trying to decide between staying quiet one more time and finally saying the true thing out loud, I hope Ruth and Raymond's Thanksgiving helped you make the call. If you've ever been handed a list instead of an invitation, this story was for you. You don't owe an explanation for your absence to people who never once noticed your presence. There are more stories like this one waiting for you in the description below. Take care of yourselves, be good to the people who show up for you, and I'll see you in the next one.